introduce them properly and who will be leading things along. But I just want to say how happy we are, of course, to have in the middle Shara McCallum, our 2018 OCM Bocas Prize Poetry winner. Absolutely thrilled to have her back at the festival this year with her new book, Madwoman, and next to her, Kaveh Akbar, American poet with roots in Iran. It's published his debut book last year. You'll be hearing some of the amazing poems from that book. I heard him read at a festival in New York some months back, and it was one of those cases where, like, you know, at the reading, I pulled out my notebook and like immediately made a note to myself, like, get contact, email, invite for next year. So I'm glad that worked. He's been busy touring up and down the place, you know, multiple continents, and I'm glad that he's here for, is this your first time in the Caribbean at all? His first visit to the Caribbean and obviously to Trinidad and Tobago. So let's welcome him, welcome all of them, and we'll get the session started.
Hi everyone, welcome again to the final day of Bocas 2018. Final in the sense that it is the last day for now, but we know Bocas will live on in your hearts till Bocas 2019, without a doubt. I'm Shivanee Ramlochan. I'm extremely excited to be up here today with, frankly, two of my favorite poets, whose work I have long read and long admired and long obsessed over. And you need obsession in poetry. You can't have a good poem without some obsession, I think. And so I'd like to introduce the poets properly. Kaveh Akbar's poems appear in the New Yorker, Poetry, the New York Times, and several other publications. Born in Iran, he teaches creative writing in the US and has won the Pushcart Prize, a Poetry Foundation Ruth Lilly and Dorothy Sargent Fellowship, and the Poetry Society of America's Lucille Medwick Memorial Award. Next to him, as you know, is Shara McCallum. And since her official bio is proving elusive, I will say that Shara is the 2018 OCM Bocas Poetry Prize winner. This is her 5th collection of poems, and we are delighted to have both of them. What we'll do is start things off with readings from the poets, and Kaveh will begin.
Hi, everybody. Can you guys hear me okay? Yes. It is such a thrill to be here. It is such an absolute thrill, such an occasion for gratitude to get to be here and to get to just like listen to so many strings of brilliant sentences spoken in a row by truly, I mean this absolutely sincerely. My head is spinning. I think I've gained like 20 pounds eating doubles. It's been a dream. It's been an absolute dream. Thank you so much for having me. I'm just going to read some poems, and then I'll cede the floor. This first poem is called Vines. Also, I'll be reading some new poems and then some poems from the book as well. But this is a newer one called Vines. There are fat, wet vines creeping into my house through the pipes and through the walls, gentle as blue flames. They curl into my living. There is ice in my attic, sugar on my tile. I am present and useless like a nose torn from a face and set in a bowl. When I saw God, I used the wrong pronouns. God bricked up my mouth hole. His fists were white as gold. There were roaches in my beard. Now I live like a widow. Every day a heave of knitting patterns and sex toys. My family speaks of me with such pride. Nunashtarogan, they say. His bread is in oil. I thank them for that and for their chromosomes, most of which have been lovely. I am lovely too. My body is hard and choked with juice like a plastic throat stuffed with real grapes. My turn-ons include Ovid and fake leather. My turn-offs have all been ushered into the basement. I'll drink to them and to any victory. The vines are all growing toward the foot of my bed. I am the only person still in this house. There is no one here to look away. Thanks. My first language, I was born in Tehran, Iran. My first language was Farsi. But I don't speak that anymore, and it's a really strange thing. I've spoken with several people here about this phenomenon and its cousin phenomena as it's manifested respectively in our lives. So maybe this is useful. This poem is called Do You Speak Persian? Some days we can see Venus in mid-afternoon. Then at night, stars separated by billions of miles, light traveling years to die in the back of an eye. Is there a vocabulary for this? One to make dailiness amplify and not diminish wonder? I've been so careless with the words I already have. I don't remember how to say home in my first language, or lonely, or light. I remember only Dalambarat Tang Shode, I miss you, and Shabakher, good night. How is school going, Kaveh? Dalambarat Tang Shode, are you still drinking? Shabakher. For so long, every step I took was from one tongue to another. To order the world, I need, you need, he, she, it needs. The rest left to a hungry jackal in the back of my brain. Right now, our moon looks like a pale cabbage rose. Dalambarat Tang Shode. We are forever folding into the night. Shabakher. Thanks. When my book came out, I gave it to my mom, who reads my poems. My dad doesn't, which is for the best. But I gave it to my mom, and she read it, and she said, this is nice, but why are there all these poems about your dad in here and no poems about me? Which is empirically untrue, like it's quantifiably, untrue. But ever the diligent son that I am, I wrote her a poem. So I wrote, this is that. But it begins by talking about my dad for a second, so, so forgive it that. Forgive it that. This is called Ultrasound. My father is tying concertina wire around his garden again, which is now all but ruined by squirrels, deer, and worst of all, rabbits with cucumber seeds stuck to their tails. I am an apex predator. My father is an apex predator. God makes us in pairs. My mother searches the lawn for four-leaf clovers, pinning them to a scrapbook, pinning moments to time. She gives each clover a name. Buck comes onto porch and hospital note from Kaveh. While she makes tea inside, I search the house for a lighter and can't even find matches. What I miss most about winter is the brightness of winter. Summer is all foggy and wet. My mother hovers in the kitchen like a strange tune. She is out of saffron and has no money for more. She weeps over her bleach white rice until my father comes in, cracks an egg over the plate, bursts the yolk, says, see, says, yellow. My mother smiles so big and sad, she wrinkles into the future where my eyes are yellow again, maybe from the yolk, maybe something else. My fur is coming in so thick, my mother would squeal with pride if she could see it. When she was pregnant, I kicked so hard, so often she could barely sleep, staying up all night. She thought she must be full of bunnies. Maybe just a couple more. This is called Every Drunk Wants to Die Sober. It's how we beat the game. Someone just say, so true. It is. Every drunk wants to die sober. It's how we beat the game. Hazrat Ali, son-in-law of the Prophet, was martyred while saying his evening prayers by a poisoned sword. His final words, I am successful. I am successful. I want to carve it into my forehead. I've been cut into before. It barely hurt. I found my body to be hard and bloodless as glass. Still, for effect, I tore my shirt to tourniquets. Let me now be calm for one fucking second. Let me be open to revision. Eternity looms in the corner like a home invader saying, don't mind me, I'm just here to watch you nap. If you throw prayer beads at a ghost, they will cut through him soft as a saber through silk. I finally have answers to the questions I taught my mother not to ask, but now she won't ask them. As a child, I was so tiny and sweet, she would tuck me in saying, Mush bukrate, a mouse should eat you. I melted away that sweet like sugar and water, like once fresh honey dripping down a thigh. Today, I lean on habit and rarely unstrap my muzzle. It's hard to speak of something so gauche as ambition while the whole wheezing mosaic chips away. But let it be known, I do hope one day to be free of this body's dry wood. If living proves anything, it's that such astonishment is possible. The kite, loosed from its string, outpaces its shadow. An olive tree explodes into the sky, dazzling even the night. I don't understand the words I babble in home movies from Tehran, but I assume they were lovely. I have always been a tangle of tongue and pretty want. In Islam, there are prayers to return anything, even prayers to return faith. I have been going through book after book, pushing the sounds through my teeth. I will keep making these noises as long as deemed necessary until there is nothing left of me to forgive. It's fine. This is the last poem I'm going to read, and then I'll cede the floor to our prize winner, which is a very, very cool thing to get to share the stage. This poem is called Portrait of the Alcoholic Floating in Space with Severed Umbilicus. If you are floating in space, free floating in space, the tether that connects you, I don't know, I'm speaking in the second person, but if one is free floating in space, the tether that connects you to the space station is called an umbilicus, which I find very sweet. Portrait of the Alcoholic Floating in Space with Severed Umbilicus. In Fort Wayne, I drank the seniors, Old Milwaukee, Old Crow. In Indianapolis, I stopped. Now, I regret every drink I never took. All around, coffee grounds and eggshells. This sweating, a mouthful of lime. As a boy, I stole a mint green bra from a laundromat. Took it home to try on while my parents slept. Filled its cups with the smallest turnips in our pantry. The underwire grew into me like a strangler fig. My blood roiled then as now. Back on earth, frog spit is dripping down wild aloe spikes. Salmon are bullying their way upstream. There is a pond I leapt into once with a lonely blonde boy. When we scampered out, one of us was in love. I could not be held responsible for desire. He could not be held at all. I wonder where he is now. If he looked up, he might see me, a sparkling. I always hoped that when I died, I would know why. My brother will be so sad. He will tell his daughters I was better than I was. He will leave out my cruel drunk nights, the wet mattresses, my driving alone into cornfields, unsure whether I'd drive out. I wish he were here now. He could be here. This cave is big enough for everyone. Look at all the diamonds.
afternoon. How are you? You all have stamina. Thank you for being here. I've said a lot of thank yous, but I keep feeling the need to give thanks because most of us in this room are writers, and you understand when you're writing that you write into kind of an abyss or a void. And so it is a great gift to be given so many more attentive and thoughtful readers than I could have imagined. I'm going to just read the poems because I'm really looking forward to talking and hearing what you want to talk about as well. Kaveh, thank you for your reading. Race. You are the original incognito. Transparent, all things shine through you. She's the whitest black girl you ever saw, lighter than flesh in the Crayola box. But man, look at that ass. And look at her shake it. We're just words, not sticks or stones flung, when dresses were the proof that clung like skin, when lipstick stained brighter than any blood. Girl, who is it now you'd want to see you? And what would that mean? To be seen? Why not make a blessing of what all these years you've thought a curse? You are so everywhere, so nowhere. In plain sight, you walk through walls. One of the great things about coming to festivals like this for me is to get to hear writers who I've long admired, meet them, and discover new voices as well. And so this is for Adalbert. He asked for this one. Madwoman in middle age. As a girl, I knew the world as mutable. A beggar could pass for king, a maiden morph into a fish. When the caterpillar's husk unfolded as wings, I believed even the dead could be returned. I walked across a sea and then an ocean. For years, I flaked their remnants off my skin, flung them over my shoulder to shake the old people's prophecy. All her life, that gal going suck salt. In a new country, I became a woman, mistaking what I'd loved for what I'd lost. Now I tell myself, every red is not a shade meant to shame a poppy. Now, when tea leaves drift through steaming water, sifting into shape, I say, this portends nothing. I'm going to read what I think of as a kind of partner poem to Madwoman as Rasta Medusa. It's in a totally different tonal register, but the commonality for me is trying to confront, in this book, many of the things that I write up against are the ones that could possibly reduce you to madness, and one of these for me is sexual assault. Oh, abuse. When I try to locate you, I think maybe you are lodged in my scapula like ill-formed wings. When I listen for your voice, I hear a faint lullaby of razors and knives, though fainter. You are my first darkness, but I continue wanting to see you as a sapling, greening and tenderling. I am perhaps naive enough to believe if I could unlock your origin, I would glean knowledge of what separates a spirit from itself, would understand what makes each of us sometimes that creature of no good, of pure whatlessness. Oh, abuse, you swallowed the sun when you came, but also taught me it never shines for any of us exactly. A gift I have thanked you for many a time since. So no, I am not calling you to account for your sins. What use would that be to either of us, travelers landed so far from where we began? No, I am asking you to step into the light so I may finally behold your face. Or please, when I speak the only name for you I have, please, just once, answer. I am really sorry because this is not a happy poem either. But the thing is, I'll just say a couple things. One, my father died when I was young, so I thought I had dealt with death and with the arrogance that comes with a certain degree of survival of something like that young. I assumed I knew what grief was. And then I went through a period of years more recently in which I had to confront my own arrogance, grief. I linger rearranging the furniture, making the sky contract till it no longer contains the horizon. When I hover, you hear cicadas crescendo. You mistake me for winter's onset or the body as it ages. Foolish girl, you console yourself with fables where straw is spun to gold, yet a promise remains unpaid. Have you really not yet learned? Only in fairy tales is disaster averted with a secret word. In this world, magic claims no dominion. Death is a door which keeps opening. One more, I think. So because I feel some degree of obligation whenever I read, for some reason, I think many of us who write poetry know this, never to leave on that kind of a note. I'm going to leave you with this instead. And I will just say that this is about the most hopeful I know how to be right now. The parable of shit and flowers. I not the Lord. If I turn the other cheek, is my ass them going get. You, from time you was little bit, you pick up one ugly bug and call it beautiful. You stop for chat with every sorefoot man in the street. Even how you is big woman, come in like you forget what people can do. Gal, you too trusting. I did tell you that long time, but I see now, you're hard of hearing. You're ignorant so, to me no know what to do with you. You don't even watch news. Stick your head in sand like ostrich. Child, life not easy for true. You choose for believe is only better rose. But hear me, I did grow them. And what you have to put in dirt stink to ass, but is what make them come up. Thank you.
Thanks very much to Kaveh and Shara. So I promised I would begin each of my panels with confessions. And These confessions are from my diary. And the first one is for Kaveh. These lines from his poem, An Apology, are written in my diary. I won't tell you where or about what, but they're in there. As a boy, I tore out the 109 pages about hell in my first Quran. Bountiful blooms scattering, Lord. I could feel you behind my eyes and under my tongue. Kaveh, I thought maybe we could begin by speaking about the at least 109, I think several more, ways that you move God and the divine through this collection. And what I really want to know is, did you find any new conversations with God while you did that?
Yeah, I mean, that's so cool that those lines made their way into such an intimate space for you. And I mean, that's not a passive thing, that's an active thing. So thank you for giving them that sort of place in yourself and in your pages. Yeah, I think that I'm sort of endlessly interested in the idea of poetry as a mechanism by which to thin the membrane between you and the divine, right? I grew up speaking Farsi and English. Those are the two languages that were spoken in my household. But we prayed in Arabic, you know? So we were praying in a language that nobody in my household spoke. And so as a 3 and 4 year old praying in Arabic, right, I understood that these sounds that I was making, this mellifluous, charged language that I was speaking earnestly that had these sort of physiological gesticulations that paired with them, right? I understood that if I spoke them earnestly enough, with enough conviction, even though I didn't understand them, it would somehow make permeable that barrier between me and God, right? And I still think that that is fundamentally how I think about poetry. That is the bedrock upon which I built my entire understanding of what art does, right? If I can arrange sounds mellifluously enough, with enough conviction, with enough earnestness, the language has the capacity to thin the membrane between me and whichever divine I'm addressing, whether that divine be cosmological, whether that divine be ecological, whether that divine be social, romantic, whether it be desire, grief. These are divine too, you know. And so this is the fundamental understanding that I have of my work. I don't need to know that, like, the moth in this poem represents my mother. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not interested in this sort of denotative relationship in poetry. What I am interested in is the associative and cosmological capacity of language.
I'm really glad that you mentioned the multiple natures of the divine and the multiple ways we can come to an understanding through poetry and other maybe less dangerous things of how we perceive God. Because, you know, it strikes me, Shara, that for all that Madwoman as a complete text does not often say the word God or goddess, I see so strikingly the divine throughout the collection. And so my confession, also from my diary, is that somewhere in there is written, the Madwoman is God. And if we could talk about how spiritual agents move in your poems, for all that they're not overt or palpably recognizable, I believe they're there.
I like all of what you've said, both of you. I apologize, my voice is like 1 octave deeper right now today. So, but I guess what I would say is the Madwoman was a character or a figure or voice I heard, and I wrote 2 poems in my second book rather, one of which is called The Madwoman Dreams the Beginning. And I don't know if you've read that, but you might appreciate how prescient you are, because she clearly is the voice of a creator in that poem. I chose not to bring it into this collection, but I realized as I was writing that the Madwoman was many selves, multiplicitous, and one of those was a mythic self in which I think we come close to understanding through symbol and allegory representations of divinity and of spirit. So I think that's one interesting way to consider it. In terms of my own background, I was struck by what you were saying, Kaveh, because I grew up with multiple religious traditions, and I wonder the songs that I remember from my childhood, or my family has Catholicism, Judaism, Protestantism, and Rastafarianism in it. And so when I was hearing Hebrew, I thought that's kind of akin to what you're talking about with Arabic for you, where it's a language you do not speak, but you use as a kind of access point. The other thing I was thinking is all of us, when we are children learning language, moving this even outside of this explicitly religious realm, I think we remember things for their sound too, and that it moves us in some way that's hard to define, but that poets certainly access. So when I was really little, for example, I don't know why, but I remember this thing from Alice in Wonderland. Beautiful soup, so rich and green. Do you remember this? Waiting in a hot tureen. I didn't know what the hell a tureen was. Never saw anything like called a tureen. And so yet I remember that. And so I don't know, I'm ranging kind of away from your question, I fear, but I think there's a continuum for me between materiality and how we understand things, spirituality, and I'm less interested in the binaries always than I am in the paradoxes of those coming together.
Yeah, don't ever worry about not perfectly answering a question. I don't believe there's any such thing. And best answers are the dangerous and mischievous ones. So feel free to give me hell. Just hug me after, maybe. I'll hug you right now. Oh, thank you. In both collections, this idea that the personae are radically witnessing themselves, the crucibles of themselves, and also their external environments, stuck with me and also struck me, because it's often, and I think this is what I look for most in poems, is I confess to be deeply wounded. And so both these books wound me in the ways that I need. And so did writing them hurt you?
Yeah, I think that's very interesting as well. I guess yes and no. I would say that sometimes when I'm writing a poem, my mind is preoccupied by like syntax. So I find actually that the experience of writing is more often a distraction from the self in order to get closer to the self. And that language as a kind of ontological experience of the world, or a way of being, is for me that kind of momentary relief. And so, but that seems really strange when you consider that I'm a poet who is so obviously, clearly, deeply rooted in the autobiographical. What I would say is I don't think you can ever remain there. And so I feel you must always push away from the shore. And so I don't know. The idea of a wound, though, I think is very fascinating. And I think there's something to that for me. And I would just say with other language that I love, with other poems like you're describing, that there is beauty in that moment, that sometimes seems truer to life experience. So maybe a bit, yeah.
That's beautiful. My book is an addiction recovery narrative. It is my addiction recovery narrative, and it makes no sort of secret, or it doesn't try to obfuscate that fact. So when I was writing the poems, I was very much in the throes of having just hit the reset button on my life, right? And everything hurt. Everything was an exposed nerve, and I really, truly just didn't know what to do with the 18 hours a day that had suddenly opened up. My entire life had been predicated on this slow lurch from crisis to crisis, and once that had been removed, I truly just didn't know how to exist in the world. I didn't know what an adult, I didn't know how to eat. I had no relationship to food, really, save, I'd eat like a bag of popcorn every couple days, you know what I mean? So the poems were a space where the space of composition, I didn't have to worry about what to do with my physical body. I didn't have to worry about, it was that practical for me. In the space of composing a poem, I had 6 or 8 or 10 sometimes hours where I could just forget about the sort of maelstrom that was going on up here in my, even the most skeptical poets among us will talk about the process of composition by using phrases like, "Oh, the hours just flew by," or such and such a phrase just came to me, right? There's this sense, and I'm not the most skeptical of anything, but there's this sense, right, that there is a sort of communion with some energy that is outside of yourself, and I had no relationship to a kind of living that was in any way external, right? It was as if I had just mirrors in front of my eyes. All I could see was like what was going on in there, So it was my first sort of communion with any sort of externality in my adult life.
Thank you both very much for that. And I thought, as one does, we would go from the discussion of deep-seated trauma to Facebook. And I find it fascinating that you both exist at opposite ends of the social media spectrum, I would say. And since a big concern of this year's festival has been in how we live with and breathe in our archives, can we talk a bit about social media? I will make a very big confession here that, I run social media for the festival, but personally, I'm coming to really hate it. Don't tell anybody. It's not like this is live streamed or anything. So how do you contend with that? Well, with abundance of it for you, Kaveh, and then an absence of it for you, Shara.
Yeah, I'll say that I've been off of Twitter and Facebook for a minute now. So maybe that tells you everything you need to know. Though I'm still on Instagram because I like looking at people's cats. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing, right? When I tweet out, if it takes me 15 seconds to tweet a poem that I'm reading, right? And instantaneously that poem will be in front of thousands of people across the world, right? Instantaneously, right? A collegiate literary journal would kill for that kind of circulation. You know what I mean? And so in this way, right, the fundamental unit of the poem, I think, and this is a change that has been going on for really the past century, but it is particularly pronounced now, is changing from the book length to the poem length. When I say the fundamental unit, I'm saying like the vast majority of people's experience of it, right? The median experience of the poem is the poem, right? Not the book anymore. And this is something that we can either sort of like fight and tear our hair out about, or we can just sort of lean into it, right? And we can say, cool, more people are reading poetry, which is all I ever want. My entire mission on the planet is to share this delight that has sort of saved my life and saved the life of so many people who I love and admire, is to share that with people. You know what I mean? That's all I want, is to be in service of that delight, right? So social media has been an arm of that. That said, I've been off for a minute for, self-care reasons, but.
So I'm going to return to your question. I feel like I didn't answer about the wound, because that word is sticking with me. Maybe I don't think I go to poetry for a wound, actually. I think what I go to it for is intimacy. And so I feel as if somehow the poem is this bridge between my consciousness and that of this other person who wrote the poem, and the poem has its own consciousness as well, that is what is this intimacy I would describe. And the reason I'm talking about that is that I think the reason that I'm not on social media, there are many of them, there are many, but one of them that's most relevant to what you've been talking about this afternoon already, Shivanee, is I don't find it intimate. I don't find that exchange personally very meaningful or gratifying. Now, that sounds strange to say because I'm not on it, but what do I mean by that? I think the too muchness of it for me is why. And so I can't commune with that many people at one time and feel as if I've had an experience of another person. I prefer most, actually, one-on-one contact with people, which for some people is really intense. And I understand that, and I respect that, and we're all different people going through the world. I also recognize my limitation with being able to deliver that kind of experience for other people and for myself, but I'm okay with whatever I'm missing. I think partly too, we established on one of the panels that I'm one of the oldest writers at this conference. So this was a joke, but it is also relevant. I was 23 years old before I used email. And so what that means is that I was formed in another kind of space in terms of what I understand to be also human interaction. And I guess I've kind of resisted it without meaning to. It was mostly self-preservation. It was mostly like I don't know how to be in that so muchness of it. It would just create enormous amounts of anxiety for me and to do that. So I guess, those are some of the reasons why I am doing it, but it was accidental. It wasn't like I said, I'm not going to do this. It was just, I don't have time, or I have other things to do, or, whatever. But I don't even have a website, so I kind of think there's probably more to it than that.
It deeply moves me, Kaveh, when you mentioned that poetry has saved your life and the lives of so many. I mean, it's taken me, I suppose, until right now on this stage, in a very public place, to say that my own poetry has saved mine, which sounds like the worst kind of narcissism, but it's probably the purest kind of desperation, really. And so I've been thinking about that, and the form of the book of poems is an act of desperation. And the fact that for many people coming to poems who want to share their own most vulnerable selves, there can be a difficulty in the filter between the raw, traumatic, intense language of the poems and their perception of you as either embodying or having lived fully 24/7 what's in there. How do you cope with that?
You mean when you give a reading, for
Yes.
example? So always, there's a truth in the poem, but it's not necessarily exactly like, so you have to remind people, like the Shara that is in this poem is not the whole of the Shara that operates in the world. But I think I think you just recognize, maybe as you go along with giving readings, what your boundaries are. So for example, when I first wrote poems that were very clearly, indirectly, obliquely dealing with sexual abuse, I guess that's a very backhanded way of talking, clearly, indirectly, opaque, it's a little strange. I read one of them at a reading, first book, and I was 26 when that book came out, turning 27. And what happened was that people were coming up to me to tell me their own narratives and directly addressing me. Oh, I'm so sorry this happened to you. I was not prepared for that kind of dialogue at 26. It felt incredibly personal to me. It felt like what you said, the act of desperation of writing a thing does not necessarily mean you can speak it. In some ways, the reason to write poetry for me is to write about the things that are the most raw and difficult to look at. So it took me a very long time to feel as if I could do something useful with that conversation. So I stopped reading those poems. Maybe that was not the right choice, but I'm being truly honest that, I'm pretty open. I love to be with people, but there are spaces that are difficult. And, my father's suicide, it took me a long time to even say that phrase publicly, actually, even though I was writing those poems. So I'm going to the most vulnerable parts, race, another one. I can name them, like I can see now. I had to grow up. I had to be braver. And I just wasn't. I was brave enough, I suppose, to confront the page and the poem, but not to look at all you and say certain things. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's very beautiful. I want to take a second, too, to just address the way that Shivanee has been so open with us in this space, right? Like, I think that all relationships are a kind of series of advances and retreats, right? And it's, like, very difficult to, like, play that out on stage. And I think that Shivanee has been doing a really, really beautiful job sharing. Yeah, I mean, to the question, when I wrote, I think that Vijay Seshadri talks about poems being accounts of unprecedented experience. It talks about them being bodies in which to deposit or architecture to build around your unprecedented experience, right? So when Liang Li says syntax is identity, right? The way that nobody else in this room was born in Tehran and then moved to Pennsylvania and then moved to New Jersey, then moved to Milwaukee, then moved to India. You know what I mean? Like, I am the only person, just as I'm sure nobody has your story, just as I'm sure nobody has your story, right? So we have the way that we talk, the way that we speak is the synthesis, is the braiding of every conversation we've ever had, all of our genealogies, all of our histories, right? So when we speak, it doesn't matter what we're speaking about. We're relaying unprecedented experience. It doesn't matter how obtuse you think you're being in your poetry. You're still writing about yourself. You're writing about your unprecedented experience of cognition, or you're writing about your unprecedented experience of obtuseness, right? But you're still writing about yourself, right? There's no escaping it. Anytime you put a pen to paper, you're being autobiographical. And so, in terms of the question that I think you're asking, which is, I think has to do with kind of self-care in public spaces, I just have faith in the idea that, you know, I am a complex person. I have lived a complex life, and much of the life has been crisis and painful and difficult, right? But I also, you know, I've also loved deeply. I've also been very grateful. I've also been very silly. I've also enjoyed eating and sex. You know what I mean? Like I like the thing. I have plenty of joy in my life too, and I have many occasions for gratitude. Look where I'm sitting right now. You know, and so I hope that the poems bend towards that sometimes too. And I think that in that sort of holistic sense of me, I'm not just lingering on the. You know, I'm not saying like, here is a catalog of my grievances, or here is me stabbing into the stab wound over and over again, right? You know what I'm saying?
In the interest of not monopolizing this conversation grossly, I already have, but I won't defend that. I would like to now open the floor for any questions, comments, flatteries, endorsements, bribes, please. And so a mic will be roaming. This one. That's fine. We can go a little bit over, so there'll be time to read that final poem if you both want to.
Sure.
Yeah.
You can just shout and we'll repeat the question.
I can do that.
Brandon, go ahead, yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm Brandon. This is a question more about the act of reading poetry than the act of writing it. For both of you, but especially because Kaveh actually works in education, teaches creative writing. How do you engage with people, especially young people who I do work with, around reading and truly getting to the heart of the poem, especially if they're not accustomed to reading or writing it?
Yeah. So Brandon's question is, how do you address how to read a poem with young people, right? I think that the biggest thing to do, the biggest disservice that we can give to a poem is to say like that there is a correct and an incorrect way to experience it, right? We can all listen to Ave Maria and not understand a word of it and still cry, right? Or we can all listen to Paul Celan read Todesfuge and not speak a word of German and still feel the intensity of that poem, right? The sound itself has emotive potential, right? The sound itself carries semantic data, right? It's not just the lexical quality of the language, right? The sound, and so I think that just trusting the audience, to whoever you're talking to, whether it be young people or whoever, to have whatever experience that they have with the poem and to allow that to be valid, right, is the fundamental thing, I'd say. I'd also say that I'm a little bit averse to reducing the value of poetry to its utility or whatever, but I will say that, you know, you guys have all probably heard that we're in a little bit of a political crisis in America right now, and I think that one of the great weapons used to stifle critical thinking in 2018 is just a raw overwhelm of meaningless, vapid language, right? Just at every turn, just meaningless, vapid, empty, double-speaky language, right? Poetry is exactly the opposite of that, right? Anytime you read a poem, whether it's about, you know, grief, whether it's ostensibly, overtly political, whether it's about a happy spider, whatever, anytime you read a poem, it is asking you to slow down your metabolization of language. It is asking you to be very, very aware of the way that language is entering you, right? Which in 2018 is intensely, intensely politically potent. I'll say that.
I wonder if Shara, also as an educator, if you'd like to answer any aspect of that.
If there are other questions, I'm happy. We don't each have to answer each question. That way more voices could be heard. Does anybody have anything?
So maybe in the meantime.
Questions?
They will. They will.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. You want to go first or yeah?
Yeah, so since there are no more questions, we will invite the poets to read one final poem for you.
It's a lot of pressure. Okay. Thank you guys again so much for being here with me and allowing me to be here with you. I'm excited to hear all the smart things that everyone still has to say, and I'm grateful for all the smart things that have already been said. And thank you both, too. This is a poem about a restaurant that I grew up all over the place, but a lot of my all over the place was in the American Midwest, which is sort of not a very cosmopolitan area. And in order to go to, like, the only Persian anything within like a 10-hour driving radius was this one restaurant in Chicago. And so we would drive, 6 or 8 hours once a year to go to this one Persian restaurant to just like see other Persian people and to eat Persian food, right? And it was this mythological thing for me. I would know, weeks in advance what I was going to order off the menu, what I was going to eat, what my brother was going to eat, So this is a poem sort of about that. Also, I have to say this in America. I don't know you guys are probably a little bit more worldly and aware of this, but Arabs and Persians are two different ethnicities, different races. Close, but not the same thing. Okay, so this poem is called Reza's Restaurant, Chicago, 1997. The waiters milled about, filling sumac shakers, clearing away plates of onion and radish. My father pointed to each person, whispered, Persian, about the old man with the silver beard, whispered, Arab, about the woman with the eye mole, Persian, the teenager pouring water, white, the man on the phone. I was 8 and watching and amazed. I asked how he could possibly tell when they were all brown-skinned, dark-haired like us. Almost everyone in the restaurant looked like us. He smiled, a proud little smile. A warm nest of lips said, it's easy. Said, we're just uglier. He returned to his lamb, but I was baffled, hardly touched my raiment. I had huge glasses and bad teeth. I felt plenty Persian. When the woman with light eyes and blonde brown hair left our check, my father looked at me. I said, Arab? He shook his head, laughed. We drove home. I grew up. It took years to put together what my father meant that day. My father, who listened exclusively to the Rolling Stones, who called the Beatles a band for girls. My father, who wore only black, even around the house, whose arms could cut chicken wire and make stew and bulged with old farm scars. My father built the world. The first sound I ever heard was his voice whispering the azan in my right ear. I didn't need anything else. My father cherished that we were ugly, so being ugly was blessed. I smiled with all my teeth.
I want to have a show and tell moment for a second. This is Shivanee's first book, and this is one of the most marvelous books I've read in a long time, and because she's affiliated with Bocas, my suspicion is that's why she's not reading from it, which is disappointing to me personally, but I understand. I just want to show it off and say she is going to read, though, with Loretta and Vani when they launch their books, so maybe we can get to hear you then. I'll read one poem to close called She, and the only thing I think I could say about this is I always wanted to be a singer. She could sing the blue out of water. She could sing the meat off a bone. She could sing the fire out of burning. She could sing a body out of home. She could sing the eye out of a hurricane. She could sing the fox right out its hole. She could sing the devil from the details. She could sing the lonely from a soul. She could sing a lesson in a yardstick. She could sing the duppy out of night. She could sing the shoeless out of homesick. She could sing a wrong out of a right. She could sing the prickle from the nettle. She could sing the sorrow out of stone. She could sing the tender from the bitter. She could sing the never out of gone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shara. Let's please have another round of applause for both poets, Kaveh Akbar and Shara McCallum. I am deeply honored to have chaired this panel, and I suspect I'll have more to write in my diary tonight. Please join both poets right directly out this way. They'll be signing copies of their books, and directly in this space is a one-on-one with Andrea Alexis. You don't want to miss that. Thank you very much.